For what seems like the entirety of his career, Justin Vernon, the lead man of the band Bon Iver, has given us soundtracks to the pictures and films of the darkest parts of our lives, the times when we feel the most alone and the most isolated from our friends, peers, and the rest of the world in general. Not only did he give us some contextualization for those feelings, but also some companionship to end at least a part of that isolation and the knowledge that somebody else, and especially someone to the great levels of artistic grandeur that he's achieved, would also be feeling these same things even after attaining the success and fame that most of us could only dream of. Now, on his new album, SABLE, fABLE, in his own words, the first 4 tracks as their own separate EP, SABLE, are kind of like an ode or a goodbye to the version of Bon Iver that we've known up until now. The one that's seated in darkness and, as we'll come to see, is almost addicted to the sickness that is depression and anxiety. On this, he'll kind of teach us how to go from that darkness and that feeling of being out of control to taking back the reins and then eventually ending up at somewhere that we can all only hope to get to at some point. Justin Vernon's now 40. He's looking back on his life and he's looking forward on it as well. And while the rest of us are trying to catch up to his ability to be at peace with the decisions that he's made, he gives us that blueprint. And on this album, he gives us the surprisingly optimistic tone of the future while also giving us an acceptance and a peace in the presence, and then even an appreciation for the mistakes of the past. So let's get into it. Justin Vernon specifically said this album is supposed to be his least cryptic. It's the most literal. You're supposed to kind of just get it when you listen to it. And I think he certainly achieved that, but also as a more than 10-year-long Bon Iver fan, I think it's hard to imagine him not even subconsciously adding in some subtext and layers into the album itself. So to start, let's look at the album title, SABLE, fABLE. Now, the word sable has 2 definitions from what I could find for the most part. The first literal one being the animal that's located, I think, in Southeast Europe and Western Asia that has this dark, kind of gloomy fur that is usually kept when it's hunted. The other version of the word being the actual just adjective of dark, ominous, gloomy, those kind of like overcast days where it's not nighttime, but it's certainly not sunshine out there. Now, then we have a comma and the word fABLE. That the idea that this album is a journey from dark to light, and we're starting off with sable being the idea of an animal that's based in that darkness or known for that darkness, then the idea of this being a story about that animal brings us perfectly to that word fABLE, which is obviously where all the old stories that we know of, like Tortoise and the Hare, come in and are frequently based in the journeys of animals specifically, where they're able to kind of strip down the human ego so that we're actually able to absorb the messages within them. SABLE, fABLE. Now, the only other things that relate to this, I think the fact that there's a comma in between SABLE and fABLE, the comma representing a kind of pause and reassessment of where we're at, I think is his transition from the darkness that we see in SABLE to the storybook ending that we see in fABLE. Now, other than that comma, I think the important part to think about in how we go from dark to light is almost literally said in how he presents the word fABLE, as the F is lowercase and the word able is uppercase, as in it's our ability and within our power to take that over. So SABLE, fABLE is the start of this. Now we can go track by track and see how this might connect or how I might be projecting my own struggles onto Justin Vernon. Now, the first 4 tracks on this album actually belong to a separate EP titled SABLE that was released several months before this full album was. And it starts us off with the Ellipses track. Now, again, this album I don't think is supposed to be based in subtlety, and to me at least it seems pretty clear that this is starting off with a flat line and then comes back with a heartbeat, as in somebody coming back to life. Of course, this obviously to me means it's somehow representative of Justin Vernon kind of retaking the wheel of his life ever since, at least since his music career has started, and perhaps likely before that. It to me is just him awakening, coming back into a consciousness to kind of battle for the first time in a long time that darkness with some ammunition, as opposed to succumbing and releasing yourself to the current of your own mentality and your own brainwaves. It's him coming back to life, and on the next track we'll see him begin the process of regaining control of his own mentality and how his own brain works. Now, I said that Justin specifically said, and the album seemingly doesn't need that much interpretation, but I can't help myself, and I think the furthest reach that I know I'm making that probably wasn't intentional, but in my mind may have subconsciously made its way into the studio, is the fact that there's 4 albums preceding this one, and then there's 4 tracks on the separate EP that lead into this album. And I think the fact that an ellipses, or in my mind a symbol or a use of punctuation being on the first track, and while this is also the darkest part of the album itself, as we're saying goodbye to these versions of Bon Iver, to me, the kind of sound and sonics that exist within it, and how it's more ethereal, obviously, than literal, because it doesn't have any words. I know this is a very short track, but the use of that symbol and the kind of ethereal nature of it in general, to me, just represented a lot of 22 A Million. That was an album that obviously was made in one of the darkest parts of his time, and at least for me, is the darkest album of all 4, and kind of by a landslide. It's also my favorite, including this new one. But where that sound and that flat line comes back into a heartbeat and kind of introduces us to saying goodbye to the darkest forms of Bon Iver, it transitions perfectly into the first actual track on the album, which is Things Behind Things. That heartbeat goes kind of nicely into a sort of beautiful guitar sound that isn't quite joyous or happy, but is certainly at least a little melancholy or perhaps reverent towards a time in his life. And to me, obviously, this would mean that the song Things Behind Things is also indicative of the sounds that we hear on I. Now, he said Things Behind Things was made in pretty close conjunction with the completion of I that was released right before COVID, where COVID actually ended up canceling the tour for I. So the fact that it was made in that same time also seems to match some of those sounds that we hear from the rest of that album. This track, Things Behind Things, is, again, more of a decluttering of the mind. He said this track literally came about after one of his friends was cleaning out his garage and said as he's cleaning, it's just things behind things behind things. And Justin went home immediately to write a song about it because he realized that's kind of all we have in our head too. We think in our dark times that there's something blocking us from happiness, where if we could take out that blockage, behind that would be light that could shine in and through us. But that's not actually how it works. In our head, just like in our cluttered garage, it's things behind things. There's a memory that we have, that behind that may be trauma, that behind that may be an insecurity, that behind that may be the cause of how we're and why we're doing things in our lives today. But it's just things behind things behind things. So as he's going through these things, it's not exactly taking back control of his life, but to me it sounds like sort of an introduction to meditation. It's just the acknowledgement that these thoughts exist, and within our mind we'll always have thoughts that tear ourselves down and thoughts that build ourselves up. So the idea of meditation and decluttering our garage is kind of just putting things where they belong and acknowledging them as they come up. Now, there's always going to be things behind things or rings behind rings, and kind of rings to the idea of something like turtles all the way down. Now, this album is very literal, and the lyric to me that kind of symbolizes the song the best is when he says, I can't keep going through the motions, how am I supposed to do this now? Now again, with the idea of things behind things and going through your garage being a decluttering instead of a trying to find a solution, I think this line really represents his desire to kind of take the reins back in his own life. He starts off with saying, I can't keep going through the motions. So he's saying that there's something he's not able to do, but then in the very next line, he's saying, how am I supposed to do this now? It's kind of him realizing, like, I'm at the end of my wits. This thing that I've been doing isn't working. So now, in a weird optimistic shift, he's saying, like, hey, how can I get better? It's something that you don't normally see from people who are stuck in the darkness, which is why I think it's so indicative of a shift in his mindset. And then immediately following those lines, he even admits that he's afraid of change, which to me just kind of signals the theme of the entire album, and he kind of certifies it in interviews as well, which is that he kind of got attached and addicted to the sickness that he calls depression and anxiety in and of itself. So the afraid of change is kind of representative of the insidious nature of these mental health diseases and why they're called diseases now, because they can get inside of our brains and then they make homes within the way we think. So he's saying he's afraid of change even though he knows he can't keep doing the same thing he's been doing, and he's asking how he can move forward while sitting in that fear. Sitting in that fear is kind of what's kept him in this place, and why this is such a powerful line to me on the song that kind of gives way for the rest of him regaining the control and taking back the reins of his own mentality. Now, humoring myself with the ellipses being 22, things behind things being I think this next track, Speyside, is kind of matching up perfectly with For Emma Forever Ago in my mind. It's a sound that's sort of foreboding. It makes you feel like it's wintertime, or at least somewhere down on the docks and maybe somewhere where he lives like Michigan, but it really goes over this kind of melancholy description of a relationship, and the idea of relationships we'll see through the rest of the album. And I think, again, it, to me, always stuck out as something that's, one, in the literal form of his relationships with people and specific romantic relationships that he's described as being part of the savior for him to be released from that darkness. But again, maybe reaching on my end, but at least subconsciously, I would think that the relationship is also symbolic of his relationship with himself, giving himself a break or finding love for himself with all of the music and art that he's created, instead of punishing himself for maybe not living up to some new or made-up version of his own identity. And then he starts off this song with saying that nothing really happened how he thought it would. And in interviews, I think the literal form of this would be him saying he expected to have wife and kids and things of that nature by now, that by the end of the album we'll see him having some peace with. But I also think there's a part of this that represents the fact that he thought this darkness would go away with the success and the fame that he's attained. Again, going back to the idea of things behind things, I think he thought if he could push this out of the way, if he could attain this level of success, he thought there would be light behind that. He thought his problems would kind of be fixed without having to do the hard work and the introspection that actually comes with that progression and that growth. Or things behind things was not taking action, but more so taking stock of everything. Now that he's kind of got it organized and he can look at it all, he's starting to recognize that, oh, I thought maybe the problem is that I thought I would be somewhere different by now. And he says, I can't rest on no dynasty, as in the dynasty of his success and fame. It's not even enough for him. What's wrong with me? And then he says, I got the best of me. That line just like hung in the air every time I listen to this album. I got the best of me. This is the most important line on these first 4 tracks in my mind, because it's the time when he actually does start taking control of it, by recognizing that it was also in his control to sit in that darkness. As in, when he's looking back on this dynasty, it's like the dark part of him got the best of the light part of him. He didn't say, man, the depression and the anxiety got the best of me. He said, I got the best of me. And then in taking that control, he also says something kind of hopeful for the future, surprisingly hopeful. He says, I think there's still a man that can be made of me. And to me, that's just him kind of recognizing, after building on the idea that it was actually within his control to let that darkness take over him, he's now looking to the future and saying, hey, there's still hope for me. I still can go forward. He had to take the stock to be able to look and actually identify the issue, to then look forward and maybe not have any plan yet, but to still say that there's a man that I want to be, that I'd be proud to be, that is inside of me still. And I'm not sure how to get there, but with love and love for myself and with love from others and from a partner, I know that I can still get there. I can still be that man. So now that he's spaced all this apart and he's looking at either this metaphorical or literal relationship, maybe in the near past, maybe in the further past, he actually can identify that this problem that in interviews he describes as this boot on his chest, he's been carrying around for years. And it probably always felt like a cloud was following around with him, but the idea of it being a boot means that it's something that can be removed. We have no control over the weather, but as we go through this album, we'll see how now this moment of him regaining control reflects directly into his ability to have relationships and, again, love others and then also love himself. Now, if the ellipses is 22, if things behind things is I, and if Speyside is For Emma Forever Ago, then that leads us kind of perfectly into Award Show, which to me always sounded like the self-titled Bon Iver album, and more specifically one of his bigger hits, Holocene. And on this track, we see him finally taking back the reins, or more specifically, taking back the handle, as he starts off by saying, I can handle way more than I can handle, so I start reaching for the handle to flood my heart. 3 handles and a flood. Now, to me, this 3 uses of the word handle can possibly mean the 3 definitions of handle that come to my mind, which is being able to absorb something or to take something, to be able to handle it. Then he's reaching for the handle, just like he's taking back the reins. He's going to decide to take that handle and open that door as he so chooses. And then the furthest reach, I don't think it was intentional, but if he's having a handle of whiskey or a handle of vodka and that's flooding his heart, they might all 3 work. But more importantly, again, this is him taking back the control, and where he's now spaced apart all of the things in his mind, observed the habits that he no longer wants to continue. He's now taking the handle, taking the control necessary to allow that light, to allow that love in to flood his heart. Next, he talks about meeting a Spaniard, which, to be honest, I don't know if that's a real Spaniard, some colloquialism that I'm perhaps not aware of, but either way, that Spaniard, that might just be a throwaway Bon Iver line that's a bit nonsensical, is handing him the anvil. Which, again, since we're on our last track in this darkness, I think it's him finally realizing that whatever the Spaniard represents, let me know if you have any guesses on it. The anvil that's being handed to him is representative of that boot that's been on his chest. It's a weight that's been weighing him down. But then on the rest of the song, he talks about how someone specifically has kind of taken that weight off of him. Again, now that he's taken the handle and allowed that love into his life, he's now been given the ability to feel more weightless and allow somebody else to help him in order to be the version and the man in the future that he wants to be. So in the idea of this being a fable, he being the SABLE animal that this fable is following, we've now been able to progress with him onto this track where he's taken back control, allowed somebody into his life, and actually battled against that addiction to the darkness that we've seen up until now. So again, laying down the blueprint for us to be able to do the same thing with our own demons. First, take a step back, observe where you're at. Next, start asking about where you want to go and start recognizing the true causes of those things that exist within us. And then most importantly, as he says, once you grab that handle, he literally mentions that a new path is laid. And that path ahead can sometimes be scary because now all of our success and failures might actually come true, but the most important part is that we've taken back the control of that disease and sickness that's inside of us. We're not being thrown into a river and forced to just go wherever it takes us. We're actually making decisions for our lives, and that's really the beauty of it. If we're doing that with the people that we're supposed to be in our lives with, then whatever path comes before us is the right path. Where I interpret those first 4 tracks as being him kind of getting to this place of, okay, I'm taking control, this is my airplane, this is where we're going to go. I also think the idea that maybe, I'm projecting, but that I see of each one of those 4 songs having the sounds of each one of the first 4 albums, this short story song that brings us directly into the fable portion of the album, I actually thought was really funny how in the first stanza, there's 4 representations of each season where each album represented one of the seasons as well. The song starts out with, "Oh, the Vibrance." Vibrance obviously being the idea of life, and springtime being what's usually used in art as the beginning of life or the start of it. And then he says, "The sun in my eyes." Obviously the idea of sun being representative of summer. And then he says, till you can no longer see and you can no longer grow. You can no longer grow, almost like the idea of leaves falling off the tree, or the end of that summertime where the grass is growing and everything's growing around it. That life is starting to end before he eventually says, January ain't the whole world. January then being, of course, one of the most prominent months of winter. Especially considering this track is titled Short Story, you kind of see him going all the way through a year being a story of one part of our lives. And as he ends the song with time heals, then repeats, you'll never be complete, I think this is him saying, hey, I've taken the reins back, I've said goodbye to this darkness, and as I'm moving through the light, I'm recognizing that, again, to go back to things behind things, it's not that that darkness is never going to be there, but it's more so that I'm going to move through these 4 seasons. I'm going to move through my life, and year after year, I'm going to have dark times, I'm going to have light times, but the idea of succumbing fully to the darkness at the peril of the light is something I'm no longer going to be doing anymore, which leads us perfectly into the next track, which is where we pick up with Everything is Peaceful Love. Not a lot of interpretation needed for the song title, but when you think about it, Everything is Peaceful Love, it's sort of hippy-dippy for sure, but to me, I don't think it's necessarily the idea that everything's awesome and good all the time again. I think it's the opposite. I think it's just being here and now, another mentality that he described in his interviews. It's really his only goal in life now. It's not to get some sort of level of touring. It's not to have some sort of acclaim on his album. It's just when he's in the studio, he wants to be present in the studio. When he's hanging out with friends or playing basketball at LA Fitness, he just wants to be playing basketball. And the song Everything is Peaceful Love, to me, is a perfect representation of just being in the moment. It says, we may change someday. Couldn't rightly say, that's for parting days. Which, again, I think as he talks about, climbing a tree, to me, that's the same kind of presence and joy that has no happiness attached to it. Happiness being a gladness that comes from where we're at in life, and it's a more macro idea of being happy. You can be happy with your life while having a bad day, but joy is a purely temporary positive emotion. So when he says he's climbing a tree, I heard it as something positive. I saw it as the same thing as picking up a rock next to a body of water and just saying, I'm going to skip it just because. So he's just climbing this tree. And then when he says that we may change someday, it's the idea and the knowledge, in fact, that joy will likely succumb to something else down the road. It might not necessarily be darkness, and even the people who he's with and the place that he's at, that he's able to climb this tree, that may change someday too. But that's for parting days. That's not for today. That's for a time that doesn't even exist yet. So why would we concern ourselves with it? He talks about a burning ring, which I think could either or both mean the sun, the burning ring of sun that's hitting him as he's climbing this tree in this joyous part, or if it is something negative, it might be the heat and the pressure that comes with the level of fame that he's attained. But either way, he knows that these things are not here to stay. He's had both too much and not enough of both of those. Too much of the pressures of fame, but not enough of the light in his life that the sun could represent. He's grateful for what he has, but also doesn't need any of it. He was asked in interviews if he's releasing an album or thinking about tours to make more money, and he's like, I have enough. So everything from here on out, and again, thinking of this as a not, but maybe a goodbye to Bon Iver entirely, it's sort of crescendos like a gospel song at the end as well, and kind of reminds me back to the sun as being this higher power for people of our past, and to keep strength towards that power. That combination of crescendoing sounds and uplifting tones and the gospel feeling of it, to me, is just feeling uplifting in every sense of the word. And even the idea of the title, Everything is Peaceful Love, I think for most Bon Iver fans, there were many years where we would never think to have not just such a literal title, but also such a hopeful one that he now has accomplished here. Now that he's at peace and in a more present moment to where he's able to enjoy these things with the knowledge that they'll change, we get to kind of get to the fruits of some of that labor as we get into the song Walk Home. And I think this song is as he described in an interview, literally him kind of getting sexy as he says it, where, he's not worried about how it's going to be received or how it's going to be conveyed. He's just describing something that he's enjoyed up until now. He's describing two things that he's talked a lot about in his music, but not the fact that he's been able to enjoy them like he is on this song, which is intimacy and closeness. On this song, he talks about getting so high on this love that it's like he's not even able to walk anymore. He wants to open the curtains and let the light in. Let the light into this inside place that for so long has been representative of him isolating himself from the world, but now that he's in love, being inside is somewhere that is joyous. It's somewhere bright. He's letting the light into this place, and he's regaining control of this space that used to have control over him. It's a whole new world in the exact same place, to the point where it's almost disorienting to him. He talks about shedding earthly burdens and really more so things that are bringing light into this world that make him barely able to walk. And with those combinations of barely being able to walk and shedding his earthly burdens, I think we're starting to see some of the direct results of his psychedelic trips that he's talked about in interviews as well. The psychedelic feeling that we have of realizing some of these earthly tethers and possessions and desires and goals and searching for money and fame and success that comes kind of weirdly when you're on these trips, and then also the loss of control of body movements and the feeling that you're kind of unable to walk all comes together here as he's now let this light into his life and it's flooding his heart. Now we're seeing the positive effects of all this, and I'm sure he's going to ride this wave through the rest of the album so that we can see at the conclusion the idea of coming together between joy and darkness all at once. And that once leads us perfectly into the next song, Day One, which I think is him obviously talking about day one, meaning the time that things start, and even going all the way back to the time our lives started. He talks about the ignorance we have when we're born, and at times he thought he had life figured out after being born, but we never really know, and we can't ever really control our life. But we're blind with our timing, and the phases of thinking that we have it figured out soon end as the sun tags up. And we see another example of cyclical thinking on this song when he talks about the sun going up and the rising of it every day. We never really know what we're doing. But he's collected what he knows he has control over, and at times when he tried to take all he could from music, from drugs, from life, sometimes it felt like absorbing all of it could be the end of him. But in the chorus, we kind of start stripping away the identity of good and bad and dark and light in the first place. Thinking about again being born, it's kind of us coming in as a blank slate. And on the chorus, we see him kind of dissecting the idea that everything good and bad that's placed upon us, even in our actions or success and failures, really they're all kind of random. They're all based on the perspectives of people who we might remember, we might know still, or we might not. He wishes we could strip away all of those and those earthly burdens that we talked about on the last song to get to really who we are, who we were at day one. He's taking things slow, these layers that people are putting on him, he's allowing them to stick to him. But he wants to rip this tap wire, as he says in the song, of people gaining access to the inside of his head and affecting how he sees himself. So he goes back to meditation and puts the Pathfinder on waltz, as in he's going to take it a little bit easier through the path instead of looking for the fastest way. Letting these opinions of him and what others think has not only created a dependency on negativity for him, but it also blinded him from his own community, his own band, and even being present with them and himself in general. But now as he's starting to strip away all of those layers and he's looking back to realize how allowing those layers and the kind of dulling of himself and his true personality actually took him away from the people that he loved and the band, he's realizing experiencing time with those people was the only thing that ever actually mattered, and any moment spent worrying about the general public's view of him or the success or failure of his artistic creativity, all of that was just taking away from time he could have been enjoying life with the people who he actually loved. As he's reflecting on the time with all the positive reviews and feedback, he would feel and be absorbed by only darkness because that's all he wants. That same comfort from the SABLE EP songs where he's comfortable with that and he's afraid of the change in the path that he's laying ahead. None of it's perfect, but he's just made it through from day one. All this was dry land. Yes, you have just always had your band, but you get sad enough because that's all you seek. I don't know if there's anything more telling than that all you find is sadness because that's all you seek, and how that relates to all of us being more comfortable with accepting the darkness in our lives than actually going out to look for the light. So where we're going from day one on the previous song, we're just from on the next song, the title, From. And in this, we're living carefree, and something that we haven't really heard from Bon Iver or Justin Vernon much in the past. It's kind of Hakuna Matata. The album's progressing from the reverence and love for the past through to peace on day one, and here we actually see some sort of just acceptance of what will be, no matter what the result. He's not rushing towards the future. In interviews, he said he just really wants to be happy and be present in the moment, like we said. So in that presence, he's realized if he can continue that, it doesn't actually matter what comes next. He'll be present there. He'll find the light in it. He'll climb a tree and find that everything is peaceful love. And he just wants to be present within that. The song details confetti in the car, which to me symbolizes some sort of event, maybe a wedding, maybe, like something like a prom, but a celebration of sorts for sure. But then immediately goes to that there's trouble now, which just shows either a marriage hitting some speed bumps and roadblocks. But in a healthy relationship, that is kind of what happens, and that's what Justin describes here. I also think this could be a marriage of commitment to himself, too. Kind of wusa. Like he's made of a commitment to be happy with himself, and even when he hits something that is more reminiscent of the darkness in the past, he understands that that's just a part of this relationship that he's creating and founding now. He has peace and knowledge that it'll be okay, and within that, he says, let's run from fear, but he's not from here. Like, he understands that this fear and anxiety that he has within him, he wants to escape from it, but he's not even used to being in the place where he understands he has the control to escape it in and of itself. It ends with him saying, let's run from fear, but I'm not from here. It's like when he says, let's run from fear, it sounds like a kid going over to the neighbor girl's house with his action figures and a bandana behind him saying, let's run away together. It's not really possible, but you enjoy to watch it happen, and you enjoy the pursuit in of itself. When he says, I'm not from here, that's him saying he's not really used to being in a position where he has something to strive for, and in a position where he wants to leave the negativity in the past and move towards something in the future. The ignorance that he describes here, and not being from here, and kind of the idea that he's trying to run from fear when that's not possible, it also builds into that idea that ignorance is bliss. And he's got some peace with this mentality, and something that we should all probably take from him. He wants to run from the fear, and obviously we can never, ever outrun the dark parts in our lives. They will find us at some point. But the idea of it being a blissful moment is really more symbolic of the fact that with him being present, he's able to enjoy these things without actually having to run away from anything in his life. He's not ignoring the fact that these dark times will come. He's just saying, let's leave those back for now and let's enjoy what we have, and then we'll run away from fear when it comes back around, so be it. But he's with this person now. He wants to kiss them from ear to ear. Again, he's finding that sexiness again throughout this album, something that he may have steered away from in the past. And he's not used to it. He likes it here and now, though. And he's not worried about the future. He's not worried about the different versions of anything, because even the worst parts of his life will still just be different versions of this present. And he likes this present. Within that presence, within that peace, now we have something that's very simple in the next song, I'll Be There. We basically just get conveyed to us that the necessity for us to have people in our life is most important in our darkest times, especially with Danielle Haim having some very prominent vocals on this song. And it feels like a time when Justin may have realized what it was like to have someone there for him when he needed them the most. Again, I think the idea of this album being literal is most pertinent on this song. It's just somebody saying, I'll be there. And no mysterious lyrics are involved with it. It's just someone telling someone they'll be there and picking him up and giving him encouragement as he needs it. No more being alone, as he's now progressed through this and found the ability to be at presence with someone. He knows they'll be there, and in fact, now he's actually able to say it to someone else too. I'll be there for you now that I've put the work in to get myself here. It's almost a sign that if you really love someone, putting work into yourself is almost the more important part than trying to show up for them. You can't pour from an empty cup. We go from to I'll be there to if only I could wait, where I'll be there seems like it's someone that he wants to be there for. If only I could wait, obviously, is him having to say goodbye to someone or something. And on this song, he describes moving to California and having to face the anxiety before him in this land of sun and palms. He's still scared and wondering what the future will hold, but the song feels like sort of saying goodbye to a high school sweetheart. And now as we're saying goodbye, we're realizing it was never actually going to work out, and we're going to go follow our dreams in Hollywood as he moves to California, but he's still scared about moving forward. And in his interviews where he's talked about that addiction to the sickness and being depressed, again, with this song, looking at it from his relationship with himself, I see it as him breaking up with that side of him that's been trapped in those cabins in Michigan that he's kind of holstered himself within, and it's giving himself the liberty to feel free and to go into California and to find a new phase in his life. He's breaking up with the habitual sickness that he's been addicted to, and Danielle's perspective on this song is kind of saying that. If he says, if only I could wait, Danielle Haim sings, if only you could wait. Where that darkness is trying to latch onto him and say, if only you could wait, and he says, if only I could, maybe I could stay in this dark place with you and stay in Michigan here. On the literal relationship side, it feels like going through a breakup where the timing just isn't right for the two people. There's no animosity towards it. And she sings, if only you could wait. He sings, if only I could wait. So maybe this is a relationship from recent times, or maybe it is a literal high school relationship or somewhere in that kind of era for Justin. But either way, the production on it makes it sound like some hopeful energy along with saying goodbye. Again, it's kind of this balance now. We've gotten to the point where we're not alternating between happy and sad. Shout out Casey Musgraves. It's being both at the same time. That's what life is. If you want to seek the darkness, like he talked about earlier, you can find it. If you want to ignore it and run away from it, you can and sit in that light. But at some point, you're going to have to come to this balance between those two things and understand that they're always prevalent and always present. The lyrics here list out, he's learned replace, and describes how she wants to sit in that northern bar, and again, he's moving out to the sunny California. The lyrics on this song are all represented when he says things like, he's learned replace. Danielle sings about wanting her snowy, cold bar. He talks about going out to California and actually leaving that darkness behind in Michigan that Danielle might be representing here, as he says, I take the steps to stage, and they hit me with the rays now, the rays of sunshine, as he takes control and takes the steps towards that stage in California, which is really just him being able to become something and someone. That man that he was talking about at the beginning of the album is now becoming true by him taking the reins and taking on life for himself and following that path that he laid right before starting this fABLE. So he just made the move to California, he's taken the reins, and then this song ends with two forms of transportation showing that he's leaving that darkness behind in Michigan that Daniel sings about with wanting the cold there. He says he's not for the freight and the highways, like a freight train or the highways that take us where we're going. This is for himself. He's taking control of the world around him. He's taking control of his destiny, his future, and now he's starting to be able to balance the fact that he's going to have to say goodbye to things as he says hello to others. but it's nothing else that he would want from the traits of his own world. And if he needs to be, he'll be his best alone. As he's taken control, he's made his own moves, he's left his old identities and his old addictions to this suffering behind him. There's a rhythm. The last true track on this album sounds like a triumph of depression and anxiety in my mind. He's asking if there even is a different feeling at this point. Or is it just more or less this feeling? And what's even the difference? He could complain about all these feelings like he used to, but that would kind of be allowing that boot to be placed upon his chest again. So to put out music, to be a part of this world that his music has brought him into, but this is how he's grown up. And the miles of tape that he sings literally on the song is a film or recording equipment or some kind of thing like that. And he's looking back on it now, and to me, it feels like he's remembering why he started all of this in the first place. Not to live up to some magical image that we've created for ourselves to attain, but just to make art. And all art is equal as long as it's true and genuine. And to me, that's the rhythm that he's talking about. The rhythm of his own drum, the thoughts in our own mind, our own perspective on what's good and what's not, and just following that. Our internal rhythms are like a circadian cycle. One's not muted or distorted by our fears. That fear was left in the past, on the past song, when he left it all back in Michigan. Now there's just a rhythm. He got tall and walked away. He's had one home in the snow that he talks about, but it's time to go for a land of palm trees and golden skies, that he says literally. But moving to LA or changing scenery or obtaining new identities, he knows these don't solve anything. As he says, there's still miles and miles to go. But that's what he wants, because that's what it is. And that's what it should be. And that's his only option. If we think there's going to be one change or one thing and all of our problems are going to go away and life's suddenly going to shed all of those bad things that we've been trying to avoid and ultimately give us everything we've wanted, unfortunately, it's just never going to be like that. That's not how life works. There's a rhythm to the darker parts, and there's a rhythm to the peace and light and joy that we experience to combat those darker parts, and he's been down this road before. He's not going to brag or boast about it, and he ends the song with saying that he's seeing someone in Spain, maybe that same Spaniard that we were talking about earlier. He calls them a babe, but says that they need space. Because of the literalness of the album, maybe I'm off and he's just at peace with someone who now needs more space, but I just can't shake the feeling that it's at least partly is to his tortured artist self that he's saying goodbye to officially, as he's introduced from a new form of light at the beginning of the project. It's the darkness that's treated him well. It's been what he used as his muse to create the art up until now, but now he needs some space from that for himself as well. He has no more shame for it to act upon, and he says now things really are arranged. Like he finally has his mind sorted out. All of those things behind things are finally figured out, and amongst that, he's found that there's a rhythm within it. The arrangement for the song had a rhythm for it. The arrangement for his brain had a rhythm for the peace that he was able to attain. His approach to life with peace and light has been organized, and so now he can see how to play it out, just like an arrangement of music before him that obviously he would certainly know how to play. So now he's thinking about that rhythm, he's thinking about his routines, he's thinking about how much the sunshine is helping him, and playing basketball at the Rec and making music for himself and in different forms from Bon Iver. He's not even announcing a tour for this project because that would take away from the presence of him enjoying the release of it. In the beginning, we see a tortured artist beginning to learn about leaving the reliance of darkness to open himself up to the possibility of the future. Now he's moved into the light, and he's not ignorant of the dark, but he's equipped with the experience to actually move through it, which leads us into the last track on the album, Au Revoir. And he's now gone from the decluttering of a metaphorical garage in Michigan to moving through seasons and years of practicing peace and finding love and saying goodbye to darkness and then saying hello to it again and then having that balance before ultimately moving to California for the road that lies ahead, both dark and light, he's now officially saying goodbye. And because this song has no words, I'm putting all of my own kind of presuppositions into it, but I would just describe this as an ethereal leaving of the physical world entirely. Again, he's talked about using psychedelics as a sort of therapy or a way of contextualizing the darkness within him, and this is sort of a meditation of enlightenment that you could get when you're on LSD or other psychedelic drugs to process the emotions in real time. When I listen with my eyes closed, it feels like those meditative bowls are all ringing around, and then at some point I'm listening to those bowls and I slowly cease to be in my own human form and I transcend into something like a ball of energy that's lifting into the greater consciousness. Just existing in the world of sunshine. No occupation, obligation, or need for demonstration, just existing. And that's enough. That's where this album ends, and that's why it ends with one long note, just like it started with one long note, to bring us back to the cyclical nature as we began. Except this time it's pitched up, just slightly. Like his disposition and like our ultimate goal should be in life. It's to process negativity, to process our experiences, and to process all of it in order to get to a place that's just slightly better than we were before. I think this kind of is perfectly represented as a beginning and end, considering that while the Ellipses track and the Au revoir track both contain the starting of a flatline sound and the end of a higher pitch flatline sound, as in even in that death, now he's going to be having more life. It's also important to know that some of the first lyrics in the first song, Things Behind Things, he says that he needs to rearrange shit. And then in one of the last lyrics before the repetition of there's a rhythm, there's a rhythm, there's a rhythm, like a heartbeat, like a heartbeat, like a heartbeat, he says that there's an arrangement. He starts off with saying, I need to rearrange some things, and then he ends with saying that there's an arrangement. And if there's nothing more telling of how this album describes the process of darkness to light, the idea of needing to rearrange something ending with the fact that it's finally arranged would certainly do that.